See the stripes going through those rocks? Those are stromatolites. They follow that one bed right there. They're very nice.
There's always been the question of how far back the fossil record goes. And in the latter part of the 19th century, people started looking intensely and extensively in Precambrian rocks, looking at Precambrian strata, and they found a number of things that look like this. Stromatolites are structures produced by the physiological activities or the life activities of a community of microorganisms. There's always been a question of what the most ancient evidence of life in the fossil record is. And in the latter part of the 19th century, people really started looking extensively at Precambrian rocks, very, very old and very ancient rocks in the Earth's crust, and found a number of structures which were referred to as various zoans. The first one was the famous Eozoon, or canadense, or the dawn animal of Canada, which was found in Quebec, associated with a series of what looked to be like siliceous nodules, but which the rocks of which were very, very severely metamorphosed and very, very high-grade metamorphic rocks. They're found in marbles. And there was a major controversy in the late 19th century as to the status of what Eozoon canadensis was. Was it the oldest evidence of life? Was it the oldest evidence of living things on the Earth? Or was it a false fossil or a pseudofossil? Shortly after Eozoon was described, a number of other zoons became known. One of these is this sort of onion-like form. If you cross-section the form, it looks like an onion, and it was called Archaeozoon, found in New Brunswick. Another one was described initially by James Hall in Cambrian rocks on the edge of the Adirondack Mountains, and it was given the moniker of Cryptozoon, or the hidden animal. And these were thought to be various forms of giant foraminifera, or giant protozoans, or protista. Things that look like curved structures, sort of like fingers, are called stromatolites. And they're fossils of very, very primitive life forms. They are fossils of what is called the blue-green algae, or the cyanobacteria, which are some of the most primitive life forms that occur on the Earth. They're relative to bacteria. They're in some ways photosynthetic bacteria-like forms. And they grew in colonies on the ocean floor as far back as 3.5 billion years. And this is about 500 million years. These rocks are about 500 million years old. And this is some of the last of an ecosystem that was dominated by these blue-green algae, dominated by large quantities of this very, very primitive life forms. And essentially what you're looking at is a reef. You're looking at a reef that grew on the seafloor about 500 million years ago. Associated with this were a number of mollusks, a number of snail and kind of cone-shaped mollusks of various types. Some of those are down in the van. If you haven't seen them, with those of you with Dick Cameron, you might want to take a look at those. In fact, they came from just over the hill down in that next hollow down there. And mollusks would feed on these. The ecosystem of all this blue-green algae was very conducive for large numbers of mollusks to feed. So you find pockets of these fossil mollusks throughout the Ozarks, usually associated with these stromatolite reefs. You can see here's a dome of them right here, and another dome right in here. And the organisms were growing in mats on the sea bottom, kind of green, felty mats. And as they would grow, they would build up mineral deposits. And what you're seeing essentially are the mineral deposits that are produced through the life activities or the physiological activities of the blue-green algae. So these are some of the oldest evidences of life. There are stromatolites almost identical to these found in rocks 3.5 billion years old And there's a few areas on the Earth where there are still stromatolites living. There's an area in northwest Australia in the Indian Ocean, an area called Shark Bay, that has domes like this that are actually coated with modern colonies of blue-green algae, essentially a remnant of an ecosystem that goes as far back as 3 billion or farther back than 3 billion years. So you're looking at, say, what is incredibly ancient life. And this again, when astronomers, so you group with the astronomy group here, contemplated Mars, they thought that probably Mars would have colonies of something like this, that the blue-green algae are very, very hardy. They can live under very harsh and very difficult conditions that would kill most other life forms. They can survive very massive amounts of ultraviolet. They can survive very massive amounts of radiation. And the surface of Mars was thought possibly to be essentially covered by mats of blue-green algae. And when the Viking landing, or the Mariner landing rather, sampled Mars, they found no evidence of any life, no evidence of cyanobacteria or blue-green algae. But it's not unreasonable that some life form like that could have evolved on Mars and probably could colonize Mars. You could probably get blue-green algae to live very nicely on some of the Martian surface, probably in some of the depressions in the craters and such. So anyway, these are the very, very ancient fossils of cyanobacteria, although these are, say, a mere 500 million years old, which, makes them young ones. But this is the last of this dominant ecosystem, because in most of what's called the Precambrian part of geologic time, these are the dominant forms of life. And in the Cambrian period, which these rocks are Cambrian in age, blue-green algae and stromatolites were still very, very dominant. And it wasn't until a little bit later in the Ordovician that other life forms started supplanting and kind of taking over the dominion that had been previously occupied by blue-green algae. And this essentially is a reef. This is part of a reef exposed, of course, by the river having cut down through these beds a few millions of years ago. So take a look at them. They're all along here, but this is the best exposure right here of them. And I prefer that you don't hammer at this, because this is kind of a show thing. You can probably find some loose pieces, and if you look down at the base of the road down there, you can probably find some loose chunks of it, because I like to keep that intact as it is.
Stromatolites are structures produced by communities of minerans. Most of these minerans are blue-green algae or cyanobacteria. Stromatolites are a community, a whole bunch of different kinds of minerans living together in a harmonious arrangement. A variety of different types of stromatolites exist. Here's just a few of them. For instance, these are some of the weird stromatolites that occur in the mid part of the Precambrian, what was probably the greatest diversity of mineran communities and minerans in general. You get a tremendous variety of different kinds of stromatolites, which have been given various names, such as Newlandia, or Coperia, which you see here, are cryptozoons.